There was once an emperor who was a great warrior and conquered more countries than anyone in the world. And when he did, there was only peace if the defeated king would send him one of his sons for 10 years' service. The king of Romania, the latest conquest, was in despair. He had 3 daughters and no son to send. But he did not know his youngest daughter, Fet, though born and raised as a girl, was in their heart really a boy.
You must send one of us to the emperor,
His children insisted. But the king realized he had taught them only those things expected of princesses. Afraid that they would come to harm, he refused. But because he loved them as dearly as they loved him, at last, reluctantly, he agreed. But still, he needed to be sure his children could survive beyond the palace. The eldest went first, dressing in her most glorious gown and claiming the greatest steed in the stables. Now, as it happens, her father, as well as a king, was also a great magician. He went off ahead of his eldest daughter and conjured up a bridge. Turning himself into a monstrous wolf, he laid in wait under the bridge. As the eldest daughter arrived, out he sprang, roaring and snarling. She froze in fear, and her horse bolted back to the palace. Next went the middle daughter, but she did no better than her sister. And so, at last, it was the turn of Fet. They went to the stables and came upon an old horse, unkempt and unwell. Imagine their surprise when the horse began to talk. The horse, it turned out, was Sunlight, the king's old steed, forgotten as the king grew old and careworn, ruling his kingdom.
but if you would only show me kindness, Fet, I would be the greatest of horses once more.
And so they did, feeding him oats mixed with milk and brushing his coat every day for 10 days. On the 10th day, his fur shone like the sun. He was as strong as a bull, and he pranced about the stables as lightly and joyfully as a pony. So Fet bade their father farewell, dressed in the simple travelling clothes and armour of a humble young man. As they travelled, Sunlight told Fet how he had learned from the king, becoming something of a magician himself, and he knew how Fet's father thought. This knowledge could prove very useful. But when they came to the bridge, there was no wolf. Instead, there was a 12-headed dragon. Although Fet shook with fear, Sunlight urged them to be brave. The battle was fierce, but at the last they lopped off each of the monster's hideous heads. Before their stunned eyes, it became their father, who hugged and congratulated Fet on their bravery and gave them their blessing to set off for the court of the emperor. As they crossed a range of icy mountains, the travellers were caught in battle between 2 giants. Each offered a gift if they would help slay the other giant. Sunlight advised Fet to help the giant, offering a locket of glimmering hair, for the clever old horse had recognized they had some strange power that might one day help the prince. So they rode into battle and split the other giant's skull in 2. Delighted, the victorious giant handed over the locket. At last they reached the emperor's court and were made very welcome. Serving as a page and rising in the emperor's esteem, for Fet was humble, clever, and patient, one day the emperor saw the golden locket Fet wore and recognized it for what it was. The hair of Ilian, the fairest fairy in all the land. A prize, the emperor thought, far greater than any other.
You will bring Ilian to court so I may marry her,
or I will have your head, declared the Emperor. Desperate, Fet went to Sunlight for aid. Now Sunlight had heard Ilian had been kidnapped and held in captivity by a genie on a distant island. Together, Fet and Sunlight devised a plan. Fet asked to be made captain of 6 boats laden with the finest goods. The Emperor accepted. No price was too dear to have the fairest of the Fae as his bride. When at last Fet's fleet arrived at the island, Fet found the genie was no longer there. Ilian had refused to marry him until he had tamed her herd of wild and magical mares, and the genie had gone to seek them. So Fet claimed to be a merchant with many curious and unusual goods. Ilian, like all fairies, loved everything bright and golden, and was mesmerized by a particularly magnificent pair of golden slippers. As she climbed aboard to try them on, the boat simply sailed away. Ilian pretended to be furious at this new kidnapping, but secretly she was very pleased to be free of the genie. But she was not quite out of danger, for even as they sailed from the island, the genie returned, gliding across the water as though the ocean were a puddle. The ships only just reached the shore in time. Fet and Ilian leapt onto Sunlight and rode for their lives. But the genie was almost upon them. Sunlight neighed a warning, and Ilian took a ring from her finger and threw it behind them. It became a huge tower, tall as a mountain and as strong as steel. The genie leapt into the air, high enough to reach the very top of the tower, and the hole that the ring made at the top. Down he fell, down and down to his death at the base of the tower. The Emperor was ecstatic when Ilian arrived at court and proposed at once. But as she had told the genie, she would only marry the one to recover her herd of magical mares. So the Emperor ordered Fet to go and retrieve them, or else.
Do not worry, master. Fetch me 9 bear hides, cover them in sticky tar, and place them on my back,
said Sunlight. When they arrived at the mare's pasture, Sunlight came forward and called to the horses who crowded round the newcomer, all but one sullen mare who advanced on Sunlight and bit him viciously. Without the hides armouring his back, that would have been the end of Sunlight. The 2 horses fought, and by the end the hides were in tatters, but Sunlight had won. All that was left was to herd the mares home.
Before I can marry you, Emperor, the mares must be milked, so that on our wedding night we might bathe in the milk and be granted eternal youth,
said Ilian. Of course, the mares wouldn't let anyone near them, so the Emperor gave the task to Fet once again, who was despondent at receiving another impossible task on pain of death. But Sunlight again had a plan. He knew a spell to bring pouring rain and freezing cold. A flood came upon the castle, and then froze around the mare's legs, holding them safely in place. And so Fet delivered the milk to Ilian with a smile. Time passed, and the fairy thought ever more kindly of the prince, and the Emperor grew more and more infatuated with Ilian. At last, she could put him off no longer. She had one last request. A flask of holy water contained in a little church beyond a faraway river. Without even waiting, Fet saddled Sunlight and made for the church. The flask lay on the altar, guarded by a troop of warrior nuns who did not sleep neither night nor day. The only chance was when a hermit came to deliver news of the outside world to the nuns, and whether by luck or cleverness on Sunlight's part, the hermit was visiting as they arrived. Fet crept stealthily past and quietly retrieved the flask, then galloped away as fast as they could. Realizing that they would never catch up to the thief, the hermit cursed Fet with the worst punishment he knew. If they were a man, they would become a woman. If they were a woman, they would become a man. But punishments are things about which people do not always agree. And when the prince suddenly felt he had the body of the man that he had always known himself to be, he was delighted. And if the hermit had been within reach, he would have thanked him from the bottom of his heart. The emperor too was overjoyed to finally get his wish, and he named Fet his heir. But fairies are not to be trifled with, and Ilian wanted revenge for all the trials and tribulations she and Fet had suffered. So she had a great bath filled with the milk of her mares, and invited the emperor to join her. As they bathed, she secretly sent for the mare which had fought sunlight. From one nostril it snorted a burning wind that shriveled up the emperor where he lay. Summoning Fet, Ilian declared,
My prince, it is you who rescued me and saved my life, doing all I asked of the emperor. It is you who gave me back my mares, you who killed the genie, and you who brought me the holy water. You and none other shall be my husband.
Yes, I will marry you, said the young man, with a voice almost as soft as when he had the body of a princess.